My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm Cloud Hired.
I'm Cloud Hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm Cloud Hired.
I'm Cloud Hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Google Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am Cloud Hired. Thank you, Mike and the GlowCloud team.
Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Gibbs, and today I'm here to answer any questions you may have about building your architecture career, maybe a cloud architect career, or a solutions architect career, or an AI architect career, or a security architect career, or an enterprise architect. My name is Mike Gibbs. I'm the CEO of Go Cloud Careers, and I've now helped people that are now working at Apple, Amazon, Cisco, Google, IBM, Microsoft, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Barclays Bank, PNC Bank, for example, and security companies such as Palo Alto Networks, for example, or Zscaler or Netspoke. People that I've trained are now working there, as well as every other organization you can think of. And I just want to help you build your career. So bring us your questions. We'll do anything we can to help. Want to know how to get somewhere? We'll let you know the skills you need or whatever. I do this because in the beginning of my career, I can tell you what it was like. I had all these goals and I didn't know where to go. And I got a bunch of certifications and it didn't really do much for me. And then all of a sudden I got a guide and that guide told me what to do, or a lot of guides told me what to do. And I finally found out what I should do. And almost immediately I hit my career goals. So I want to help you get there. So that's why I'm here. So bring us your questions. While I wait for your questions, I'd like to tell you about 3 things that we have going on for you right now. We are going to hold a webinar tomorrow from 1 to 3 p.m. like we do every Thursday on how to become a cloud architect. We'll talk about the cloud architect skills. We'll give you the actual cloud architect job description. We'll talk about what does a cloud architect do. We'll make sure you're not training to be a cloud engineer when you want to be a cloud architect, because these 2 roles are completely different. And it's all free. It'll be on Zoom, and you can ask us any questions you want about your career. And for free during these sessions, we will do anything we can to help you. I also want to tell you that we're celebrating our anniversary, which always makes me happy as a company. We've trained so many people and so many people have been hired, and we're celebrating that for a very short period of time with a 60% discount on every product and service we have. So if you're interested in training with us, now is a great time to do so. I also want to tell you that in the description of this video and almost all of our videos on this channel, you'll find helpful resources for your architect career, cloud architect, enterprise architect, AI architect, or others. And it will include, for example, free guides on the skills you need to become an architect, or guides on how to win the interview, when they're all free. So check out the description of this video, sign up and get some of these guides mailed to you, because I just want to help you in your career. So Chris, I know you're behind the scenes today. Could you start bringing in the questions for me so I can assist people? Let me mute my phone at the same time. I don't know how it's not muted. Dingelman. Hi, Dingelman. Hi, Mike. What is a distinguished security engineer, and is it a good pathway to being a security architect? So, Dingelman, that is a great question. Let's talk about, a distinguished engineer or a principal engineer and what they really are. So when we start working with regular engineers, at least early in their career, it's a lot more about building. And as they move up their career, it becomes a lot more about performance optimization and tuning, and a lot more advising and a lot less hands-on work. And then ultimately, some engineers become subject matter experts in certain things, which I absolutely love. An engineer that becomes a subject matter expert on IP voice signaling and SIP signaling, for example, and IP voice protocols, for example. And they become a real expert in that. Or they become an expert in some element of network security. Or they become an expert in some element of AI architecture, for example, or AI engineering, for example. Now, that typically moves into what you call a principal architect role. And the principal architect, and I've done that role, or the principal engineer, they're similar, but they're different. The architect role consults on architecture. The principal engineering role consults on engineering. So they will consult to other engineers. They'll be brought in to speak as subject matter experts periodically. They will help other engineers. And that's typically your principal architect and what they're doing. They're typically doing a lot of their job. They're typically doing a lot of presentations. They're doing a lot of communication. They're brought in often as part of the sales process with big vendors because they are super smart. And these are the people that you bring in to they deal with the most technical people at your client site and can have a peer-to-peer conversation with them. So that's typically your principal engineer. And you would do this, for example, and you'd bring him in. Let's say you're trying to work with Verizon, and Verizon has their MPLS experts, and you might have a principal engineer that's an expert on MPLS, and MPLS signaling, things like TDP, LDP, RSVP signaling, primary backup explosive path, that kind of thing, where you pop your labels. So somebody that's focused on that. Now, that's typical your principal engineer, someone that's good, strong, very heavy on the engineering, but now they're consulting to other engineers. They're focusing on performance. They're going to get involved in some design. They're going to help other architects in the design. Now, that's the premier technical people in the industry. Now, let's go from the principal role to the distinguished role. You're still dealing with the technical expert. But now this technical expert is typically working in working groups. For example, an Internet Engineering Task Force working group to come up with a new specification, or they're working as part of security working groups. They become not only just members of working groups, they become directors and management in these working groups. That's typically your distinguished engineer. They may have some patents behind them. They're always at the bleeding edge. They're always networking with the best of the best engineers from across the world, across various companies. You'll always see them presenting to move markets, where the same way an architect will go and talk about the business things, the distinguished engineer will talk about the business problems that can be solved, but they'll be able to dive deep on the tech. Because they're going to have enough business skills to understand where it fits in, but they're going to be experts on the tech. The distinguished engineers are going to be published everywhere. You'll see them at every major conference. And it's a bigger role of influence. So now all of a sudden I want to sell, I've got a client, say Verizon, and now I'm going to sell them an entire new, network architecture, or a huge element of architecture worth billions of dollars. Now in this multi-billion-dollar architecture, I might bring in a distinguished architect, and I can bring them in and say, see, we've got them. We've got these superstars. They're part of your team. We can bring them in anytime we need. So again, you're going to see these people on magazines and on all kinds of good things. So that's typically your distinguished engineer. And they're small percentages of your engineers. For example, at Cisco, they may have 80,000 people. There's probably less than 500 distinguished engineers, maybe 1,000. I don't even think it's that big. I think it's less than 500. And they had a very small distinguished architect team that was very small like that, a couple hundred people max. So that's typically what you're thinking about. I kind of hope that helps. So is it a good pathway? Well, it really depends on where you're trying to take your architecture career. The security architect itself, what's going to make you a good architect is not just your technology knowledge, because remember, you're going to have great engineers underneath you. It's your ability to quantify and manage risk, your ability to influence the company into actually taking you seriously and managing that risk. It's your ability to lead a large team of the right people, bring out the best things. It's your ability to be able to analyze the impact of new technology and how it pertain to your architecture and how they could be used and how they could be used against you, for example. The architect role is more about building policy and incident response procedures and guidelines. So they're different. Now, what will be the helping part components of the distinguished engineer role, for example, would be all the presentations you would do, all the documentation you would have to write, and develop industry-wide connections. That would really help you. But Dingelman, diving deep into engineering, which is about the technology and performance tuning the technology, is a little different than the architect's job, which for the security architect is to protect the organization from harm. And for example, for the cloud architect, is about how do I optimize my client's business performance. It's very different than engineering. Now, the other thing you have to be careful of, Dingelman, and I've seen this, and it actually happened to me early in my career. I had to work hard to get past it. If you're seen as too much of an engineer, then people often won't see you as an architect because they're going to see you as something different. It's the same way you see movie stars that are action stars. They don't do romantic comedies. And the people that do all these romantic comedies that my wife always makes me go see, by comparison, you don't see them in a lot of action movies. And it's okay. And it's great that we have both kinds of things. But, it'll help you in some ways. But remember, it's diving down another career, which is engineering, whereas focusing more on your business skills, your executive skills would probably be more important. But it's a great job. I have a lot of respect for these principal engineers and distinguished engineers. I've spent most of my life consulting with them because only the architectures I do are the biggest ones and often things that nobody's ever done before. And your principal engineers and your distinguished engineers, they're the people that can figure out how to help you do the things that nobody's ever done before. So they're great to have. Dingelman, great question. Please feel free to ask more. Darius. Hi, Mike. You spoke with Alonzo earlier this week and had a great conversation. Wonderful. And I know I got to speak with you last week too, and it was really nice to speak with you. You'll be joining the security community next Friday. Well, that's wonderful, Darius, and I can't wait to work with you. I know we had a good conversation, and it was so nice to speak with you, so I'm looking forward to seeing you in class. Because I know I actually teach a lot of these classes because I just love to teach. So I can't wait to see you in class. Adam123, what would you say would be the best way to gain practical cloud architecture experience for someone new? So you've got this problem where what you need is competency, not experience. Now, Adam123, the only way you're ever going to get any experience as a cloud architect is to actually work as a cloud architect, because that's how you get experience as a cloud architect. How do you get airplane pilot experience? You fly the plane. How does the physician get their experience? Well, they go to school and then they do their clinical mentorship in there. So how do you do it? Now, I'll tell you how you're going to get experience doing different things, and I'll tell you what we actually do. So what we actually do is create internships for the people that come into our program. And then we give them actual architect work to do, where we give them technology challenges, for example, and we ask them to create solutions and respond to create architecture documents and diagrams and RFP responses like they would as a normal architect. Present those actual architectures, document those kind of architectures, defend their architectures in front of a team. So, that's what we do. When we train people is we teach people how to do that, and then we make them do that because that's cloud architecture experience. And that's the only way you're going to get cloud architecture experience is to do cloud architecture stuff. But if you're not with us, what things could be similar to cloud architecture experience? Well, as cloud architects, we write a lot of documents, huge documents on architecture, for example. For example, we may write a reference architecture or something like that. So guess what? You could potentially write reference architectures. And I'll show you what that means. And for example, if you desire, bear with me. I think I have one that it was a public architecture that I can show you from Cisco that was published on the website. Let me see if I can find this. old. Might not be able to find it real quick on the fly. All right. Well, what I'll do is one of these live streams, I'll prepare and bring out an old architecture document that I wrote from Cisco. And the reason I'm going to pick out the Cisco one and the public ones are there's an NDA involved in most architectures, and I couldn't show you that. But I did create a reference architecture for healthcare. It's called the Medical Grade Network. You can Google it. You'll find it. It's a couple hundred pages on how that architecture would look. But you could create an actual architecture or a reference architecture. A reference architecture could be how would a bank secure its VPC? Or how would a bank increase its cloud security? Would it micro-segment to multiple VPCs? Where would you put your firewalls, for example? What types of IAM systems would you use, and how would you put that into the architecture? I mean, there's so much that could go into that, and you could turn that into a multi-100-page document that could show all the trade-offs and all the various architectural challenges you have, and explain the rationale of why you've chosen it. So that is architecture work. And that is actual architecture experience. It's also actual architecture experience if you write an an abstract to a publication or an abstract to speak to a conference, and you go out there and you present some kind of technology at a major conference. That is actual architecture work. In fact, I think I'm speaking at a conference for one of the cloud providers at one of their conferences later this year because I was asked to do so. And that's the kind of thing you'll do. You'll just be asked to speak at a conference. Now, I will never talk about any particular technology, but I'll talk about architectural principles. And, that's that kind of thing that you typically do is you go out there and you present at conferences. That's one of the things that architects do. Now, architects respond to RFIs, RFPs, and RFQs. And, what you could actually do is you could go out there and you could have somebody create an RFP or see if you can find other RFPs for various technology challenges and go out there and create an RFP response like they would in the real life. Look at how you would answer it kind of correctly, and you could get practice doing all these things. So that's how you get architecture experience. Architecture experience is also trying to sell something where you actually have to sell something to executives as well as technology professionals. And you need the technology professionals to say, yeah, this is going to be okay. And then you need the business people to say, yeah, so go out there and learn how to sell and start selling things and start interviewing people and collecting information. That's how you get architecture experience. I mean, the biggest thing when it comes to architecture is you walk into a client's room. They tell you about their business. Where do you go? When you walk into a CEO's office, for example, and the CEO says, we have a 17% CAGR, and we have fairly inefficient right now business processes because we were a startup, we grew, and we're now 3 years into it. And what we're trying to do is create some type of an architecture that's going to scale with us. We're going to be in this area, this area, this area, and we need these kind of security things. And this is the future of our business 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And you might have that kind of conversation with the CEO, CIO, and CFO. Depending upon the size of the business. Now, you need to know what that means when they start talking about the growth rate, and you need to understand what industry they're in, which means you then need to understand the types of technologies, applications they need, and you'll need to understand the people and the processes and the way they work in that industry. That's what we do as architects. And of course, we teach these things, but if you don't have us, go try to create a synthetic scenario and do all the research and go out there and learn all these things. So you can actually create a real valid architecture based on solving real business problems. Architecture is not like somebody drawing a picture that you see somebody doing on LinkedIn every day and say, this is an architecture. That's not an architecture. That's a technology drawing. And architecture does the following. It looks at the organization's business needs and business goals. It examines the organization's business processes. It then knows how the employees do their job and the tools they need to be best at it. And then it designs a technology strategy, which may take 50 to 100 vendors to make it work. That's going to give that business an enhanced edge or a competitive advantage. That's architecture. So anytime you can do any strategy consulting, any kind of time you can do management consulting, anytime you can give a presentation, write an architecture document, you're doing architecture work. So that's how you gain experience. Now you know why I created an architecture program, because most places you're just not going to get that opportunity. But That's the way to do it. You do it the way to work at it. Now, learning things, there's plenty of things that you can learn, but that's how you get experience as an architect. You do architect things. Good question. Let's go to the next one. How do you sell cloud security solutions following layered security to SMB customers who most of the times aren't interested? So, complete football. Nobody is ever interested in spending money on security. I'm going to say that again. No one is ever interested in spending money on security. So, how do you sell anything? Especially something that people don't want. So, this is when we're talking sales, we're not talking about how do you sell a car. That's a different kind of sales than business strategy sales. So what we actually have to do when we approach a business is we have to look at the organization, we have to look at the organization's assets, and we have to look at the risk to those assets. And then what we need to do is we need to be able to calculate what that organization's risk is, which is why you don't learn to be an architect by configuring a firewall, because we've got to be able to figure out what that risk is. Now, when we look at a business and we can identify what that risk is, we then as architects need to help that business create a strategy to manage that risk. And really, we've got a couple of options. So one option is one option that we could do, for example, is to transfer the risk. So small business doesn't have a big IT budget, but they can buy cybersecurity insurance, and maybe that's the cheapest option for them to mitigate their risk or manage the risk. I didn't say I recommend it. Now, another option will be to mitigate some of the risks, perhaps with a firewall, a next generation firewall that's got some IDS, IPS things in there, perhaps with some SIEM systems in there to try and see what's going on. Maybe we bump them up to something a little better in a couple places, enhance their network security. And if we show them that the cost of doing this is less than the actual risk they have, then they're willing to invest. So we have to design a solution that costs less than the organization's risks. You have to calculate the risk. You have to show the organization the risk. And then you really have to develop a risk mitigation plan. Now, it might be I mitigate some of these risks with this kind of thing, this kind of control, and that makes my insurance real cheap. And then I buy cyber and security insurance for the rest. That might be the most efficient thing a company can do. It might be they can mitigate more of the risks, because you can never mitigate all the risks. And then we can look at that option and see what that option actually costs compared to what the organization would lose if they had a security breach. And that's all based upon the exact calculated risk, the quantifiable risk by compromising of assets, for example. But then we also have to look at the non-quantifiable risks, such as brand damage, for example, and loss of trust in the customers, potential loss of sales, and other things. So it's our job as architects to truly understand the business so well, understand our client's business, and understand their risk exposure, and then develop a risk mitigation plan that costs less than their actual risk. And you do that, they'll buy it. So that's why this isn't like become an engineer for a couple of years and all of a sudden you're going to know architecture, because it's a completely different thing. This is more the way you would sell any product. Same thing as when a cloud architect, how would they're out there, they're trying to design a solution. It might cost $1 billion for the multi-cloud architecture that needs to be there, especially when private clouds are involved for super high performance things. So when we're dealing with something like that, we've got to understand the business. We've got to understand the business pain points. We've got to understand the opportunity we have to optimize something. And then we've got to compare the cost of solving those costs with technology versus hiring various people versus doing another method to get to the ultimate business goals. And that's how we sell technology. Our technology solution is going to generate this much money for you because we've enhanced the efficiency here, here, and here. That's why you need so much business acumen to be an architect, to understand the client's business and then to be able to solve those problems. That's why we teach sales, and that's why we teach so much business acumen when we train people. And that's why I say, if you're not going to train with us, but you want to be a cloud architect or a security architect or an enterprise architect, go get an MBA or a master's in business. It'll give you a lot of those business skills that you need. I mean, we train the ones you need and don't train the ones you don't. But no matter what, I want you to get those architect jobs. Are the greatest things ever. But that's how you sell things to customers that don't want to spend money. You show them that it costs more to not do anything than it actually does to fix it. Chris, let's go to the next one. These are great questions. Hey, Darius, what are the levels of security architects within inside of an organization? Well, there could be a lot of them. So, Darius, let's talk about them. Some organizations, not many, but all your big tech companies, AWS will do it, Cisco will do it. Typically speaking, we hire about 30 people or 40 people each year that we hire as associate architects. Now, what are the associate architects? They're trainees. We hire people, they've got no background in tech typically, or they could be, they're straight out of college. We hire them. As a company, we put them in an architect role, like an associate architect at AWS. We put these people in training every day for 6 months to a year, and they either graduate and they become a solutions architect, or they don't graduate and then they do something else in their career because they didn't graduate their internship. And I've been part of training associate sales engineers, solutions architects, that kind of thing forever and a day for companies. I started doing it at Cisco. So I'm very familiar with these programs. I've trained some people and coached many people in those programs prior to having my own company. And I also coach people on the side. So that would be your associate architect. Now, your first level of architect, you figure security architect is it's typically someone, they typically are an architect, they're typically fairly smart, they're typically fairly fungible, they learn quickly, they adapt to various situations, they typically can give a good presentation, not a great presentation yet, but it's a good presentation. They know how to communicate, they know how to obtain requirements, they know how to work within an architecture team, and they know how to do things that are very good. That's your typical security architect. That's about a $200,000 job. Now, we get someone that's a little better, and by a little better, now this person really knows the gotchas because they're really strongly skilled, and they know where things are going to break. They know where the attackers could attack. They can start to see it and get it and know it. And now they're starting to be deeper. Now, that's where I start seeing my senior solutions architect, or my senior security architect. Now, this could be 1 year in a person. A person could actually start here if they've got these skills. Or it could take somebody else 15 years, or somebody else will never get to the senior architect role. It's based upon what they do, how much they learn, how fast they learn, how motivated they are, and how good they are in the role. And that's where you're at the senior level. You know what you're doing. You're pretty independent. You're starting to lead. You're leading architecture teams. You're managing larger proof of concepts. You're dealing with larger scale architectures and bigger problems you're trying to solve. And at this level, the people are pretty solid. Now, when we reach the principal level of security architect, now we're talking to somebody that's a real expert. Someone that really knows security deeply, deeply well. They've worked with lots of clients. They know how to sell well. Their communication skills are absolutely perfect. You bring in this person because they can sell and because they've got some executive presence. So, for example, you're working on a big architecture and you want to show that client that you love them and that you can bring in all these smart people and they're all going to help with the design for that client. You bring in the principal security architects. These principal security architects deal with the scariest, most techie people that your clients might ever find and help solve those kind of problems. But they give a lot of presentations. They do a lot of coaching. They help a lot of architectures, and they do the biggest of the architectures. Now, when you reach the principal architect or the distinguished architect level, you may be doing things. So, I was a principal solutions architect in my early careers before I moved into bigger architect roles, but that was still a fairly significant role. So in addition to just doing my normal architectures, I was engaging with all kinds of stakeholders and all kinds of business leadership and technology leadership. So I could go back to the product teams and say, the clients, in order to buy what we need, are going to be looking for these features. They wanted these features to get involved in this business solution. These features will enable this business problem to be solved, this business problem to be solved, this business to be solved. The addressable market for this looks like this. So please build me these features. So you do a lot of that at the principal architect level, where you're interfacing with more senior levels of management and you're pushing things. As the principal architect, I was developing training for engineers and other architects throughout the organization on various high-level architectures, as well as various pieces and components of things people needed to know. So that's more of what you're doing at that principal architect level. Much more influence. It's typically much more consulting. And that's fairly similar to the distinguished one, but this distinguished architect is more of a thought leader, more at every industry conference, maybe working on some various patents. They may have their publicists, the company, are getting them in magazines constantly, because this is someone you're building that's going to be with the company forever, that helps add credibility to the company. I kind of hope that actually helps you. And then, of course, we move up into the executive security architect roles, which is called the Chief Information Security Officer, where it's all about the executive strategy that you're trying to do for your security. And that's really the roles you have. Great job there, Idarius. Great question. Hi, TAW 3000. For the cloud security breakdown, pay breakdown between 129 and 195 per year base, plus an additional 60 to 110K, one additional pay. Okay, what a kind of additional pay? Okay, so Tal, let's talk about what an architect pay really is. So let's say your base, and for the most part, a lot of architects are going to have a fairly similar base. Let's say your base is about $200,000. So, and that's low for a lot of security architects that I know, but let's just say that it's there. And so let's say if your base is $200,000, what the heck is your additional pay? So your pay will be composed of two things. If you are attached to sales, and many security solutions architects are, you will be getting basically quarterly checks that are somewhat like commission checks, that are based upon how much your region or whatever area you're being compensated is on sales. So in many cases, there's going to be a sales commission bonus. You're not direct sales where you're carrying a quota like a sales rep, but you're assisting in the sales process. So that typically is there. There's typically something called MBOs, or measurable business objectives, that says speak at this many conferences per year, and all of a sudden you get some extra money. And that's something else there's there. There's typically a performance factor of what you did and your work, your ability, which can determine what your bonus pay could be dramatically. Now, you'll typically be given some degree of restricted stock units every year as an architect, because architects are considered executives. So what that might mean is every year that company says, here's 1,000 shares of our stock. And after 4 years, it's fully vested and you own all 1,000 of those shares. And they might do that every year for you, for example, or it could be many times. I mean, I've seen a lot of restricted stock grants of 10 and 20 and 30,000 shares or more when you're dealing with executives each time. So you could be dealing with a lot of shares that you're getting. Now, you'll typically also be involved in something called an employee stock purchase program. So in many cases, you can buy the company stock for the lowest price it was in the last 2 years, minus 15%, and then sell it on the same day if you wanted. And then there's typically, for example, they may give you a 1-to-1 match on your 401k, for example, which could add up to a fair amount. And there's typically other things called spiffs. For example, if they desire the architecture team to sell a certain amount of stuff, and then everybody did, there's typically additional pay here. So, you know, these are typically a lot of different kinds of pay that, you know, were unfamiliar to me when I was in a healthcare career, 30 years or 25 years, like almost 30 years ago. But there's a lot of additional pay. And what you'll find is as these roles go up, you might still have the same $2,000 or $200,000 salary, but now the bonus structure could be based on 40% or 50%. And you get bigger stock grants and things like that. So that's typically what they're talking about. Great question. Hi, Swar. Hi, Mike. You're currently working full-time as an SE Good and studying computer science at University of the People or on the would you recommend you continue your degree, or should you pause it and focus on your enterprise architecture development program? Well, Swar, it all depends on what your goals are. Here's what I would suggest. If your goal is enterprise architecture, take our enterprise architect development program, but also stay in school. Now, I really wish you were getting your degree in business, not computer science, because it would be more applicable. But guess what? Just get the degree anyway and finish the degree. And here's why I say this. You have the ability to actually work without a degree as an architect. And I can give you many, many examples, but having a degree itself, I think would be good for you. Now, I also think that, and if you're with us, you can basically study anytime you want and stay on our program until you get there. So let's say you started training with us now in our Enterprise Architect program, and you were still dealing with your computer science degree at the University of the People. You know, you could still take our program and stay on our program until you're hired as an enterprise architect, even if that takes 2 years from now, while you're in school. So you could do our enterprise architecture development program at your own pace. Maybe you get done in a year and a half from now, or maybe you get done our program and graduate at the same time. Especially because our work you can do almost any time of the day, any time that you want in these programs. We do have our 3 live classes per week, but if you can't attend them, you can watch them and do them on the weekend, do them on the weekday. It really doesn't matter. But I do know you could be able to do things, and I can also tell you that I know it's possible because I did something like this when I was at Cisco, for example. And I worked full time, and I went from principal solutions architect to a systems engineer, sales engineer with Cisco for a couple of months. And of course, the only thing I did there was architecture while I had that role. But when I was doing that, Cisco sent me to leadership training, which I was doing like 3 courses a semester. And I also did my MBA at the same time. And I also worked in the most strategic project in my entire life. So you can do it, and you can actually do well. And I think if you just finished your degree, and maybe you did ours part-time, and maybe you only knock out 25 to 30% of it while you're still working your main job and going to school. What you're learning in our enterprise architecture program might get you promoted into an architect role where you're already at, which could be really, really cool while you're still going to school. And if not, you'll finish it as soon as you're done, but you can stay with us until you're hired. I mean, we don't kick people out until they're hired. We our graduation for us is someone's hired. So, there's no rush for you to do that. And that's what I would say. Do both at the same time and focus it, and then have a great option. And that's what I've done for myself. And that's why I would say that. But I would definitely finish the degree. I want you to finish your degree. You don't need a degree, but it's always going to be one of those nice things you can have that could potentially help you later in life. Great question. If you've got a different version of this question or want to know a little more, I'd be honored to help you. And if you want to come to our webinar tomorrow, it's live and free on Zoom. We can talk about it and get more information back and forth. I'm even happy to assess you to see where you're at, to see how fast we could get you an enterprise architect career based upon where you're at. I'm happy to do it there if you want to on that webinar tomorrow. So I hope to see you there too. You're coming from healthcare. I appreciate everything you've done. I'm a healthcare professional myself. Will you still have to work 60 hours a week for these types of architect salaries? Not typically. So I can tell you that when you're an architect, you'll have weeks that are very busy, and you'll have weeks where there's nothing to do. And the reason this occurs is, you'll be on a project, and the project will begin. You have to create the teams, ask a whole lot of questions, go meet a bunch of people, and all that'll be nice and relaxed. You're working probably a 30, 40-hour week at most. Everything's easy. Then all of a sudden, an RFP or a proposal is going to come out for something big. And that 30-hour work week just turned into a 55-hour work week or a 60-hour work week for the next 2 weeks. It might even go to an 80-hour work week. And then the next 2 weeks, you could be in Barbados and no one's going to care. And you're not even using your PTO because you're just working from home. So that's kind of like there's a big ebb and flow that you typically see in an architecture role. Especially as you move in your career, when you get in bigger and bigger things, you'll have a lot more ebbs and flows. And, that's one of those kind of things, but it's not going to be like healthcare. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So you get done a day in healthcare, and by the time you're done, you are drained. And here's what I can remember every time I ever work a day in healthcare. First, I love doing it, but You know, I get all through the day. I'm like, could I have done something different? Could I have done anything more for that patient? Could I have done anything more? And then as soon as I get home, I'm still seeing all the patients that I saw that day. I got that. Okay. Yeah, I didn't miss it. No, I didn't miss anything. No, I didn't miss it. Do I need to call this patient? Could I have said or should I have said something? And then 5 hours later, I'm able to fall asleep. So that's what I feel like when I'm in healthcare. And when you work in healthcare, and I'm a nurse practitioner, prior to that, I was a nurse. Prior to that, I was a paramedic. So I've got a little bit of knowledge of this healthcare thing. It is a hard job. It is a stressful job. And 20 hours of working as a registered nurse is about the equivalent work effort is about 300 hours working as an actual architect. So keep that in the back of your mind. It's not hard work. It's not hard work to sit in a meeting and talk to people. It's not hard work to bring out the best in others. It's not hard work to play golf with your client or take your client to lunches or dinners or drink, but it does take time. So I think it's the easiest job I've ever had. And I can tell you, and I've done both. Well, actually, I've been an engineer for a short period of time, though I never want to do that one again. It's better than being a nurse in my experience from a stress level, but not that much better. And then being an architect, it's a whole lot of easier things. So I kind of hope that actually helps. I think it's the best job in the world. I actually think it's the easiest job I've actually ever had. And I've loved it. And it's been 25 years since I left internal medicine for tech. And it's been 25 years of architecture. It's my life's work, and I just love it. I really do. But seriously, great question. And if you've got other questions, please bring them in. I really want to do anything I can to help you build your cloud architect, security architect, AI architect, enterprise architect, or what have you. Idaria's competency is much greater than experience. I mean, competency is everything. I mean, it is everything. It doesn't matter how much pedigree you have and how good you are if you can't do the job. I remember I had taken an executive architect role many years ago, and it was highly controversial when I took it. And the reason it was is they hired this Harvard MBA to be the architect, and they fired him within about 8 weeks. And out of nowhere, I'm now interviewing for the same role. And the difference is I'd actually been an architect for a long period of time. And yes, I had an MBA and another master's degree, but it didn't come from the pedigree, but I had the competency. And instantly I took that job, and instantly things moved up, and I kept moving up. So competency is always there. It's the reason I was a principal architect in less than 2 years when other people might never reach that in their entire career. It's the same reason Al, and I think you met Al, maybe you haven't, took his first job as a senior solutions architect at Deloitte as his first role, because he was awesome. He still is awesome. So competency is always greater than experience. I've hired a lot of competent people. I've never hired anybody with experience that wasn't competent, not a single time ever, and I never will. And I know this sounds terrible, but here's the hiring manager perspective, here's the CEO perspective. I don't care what you've done. That's all past. I care what you can do now and in the future. And that's what I care about. So the only thing that matters is your capabilities now. So yes, competency means far, far, far more than experience. Chris, okay, well, never mind. We'll take this, and then I'll get to the next question. And if you've got questions, please ask them. We want to do what we can to help your career. Hi, Mike. You've been working as a senior business analyst specializing in Oracle implementations as a contractor with a keen interest in transitioning into solutions architecture. Where should you start? So I think these are actually two questions. So let me answer the first question, and then let me get to the actual second question. So what you've done is you've actually built stuff. And building things does not teach you anything related to architecture. Now, I'll tell you why you need to learn architecture, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. You don't have to actually answer them. But I'm going to pick it based upon the next thing that you said is that your last project was working on role-based access control for users. Would I recommend mastering a domain before broadening your understanding? And here's the reason I'm going to say this. So yes, you worked in a project dealing with role-based access control, but that taught you how to build it. But it didn't teach you anything that you would have needed for an architect here, Irving. For example, here's what I would need to know. Should you use role-based access control? Should you use context-aware-based access control or attribute-based access control? What decisions did you actually use and why in order to do that? Now, what did you choose to use authentication and why? Did you use a username and password? Did you use a passphrase? Did you use a token? Did you use biometric authentication of the choices? Did you use iris? Did you use retina? Did you use fingerprint? Did you use face? And what were the trade-offs that you actually considered when choosing one of these forms of authentication, for example? Now, when you thought of your IAM strategy, did you go centralized? Did you go distributed? What were the architectural trade-offs and management considerations that are different if you actually go centralized versus distributed? Now, when you connected this, did you use something like a cloud access security broker? Did you use traditional federated architectures? And what were the trade-offs here and why? So, T. Irving, that's architecture. And you learn architecture by being trained in architecture. And you can do a project, a project, a project, a project, a project. And 20 years later, you're still not going to know anything about architecture because you're training to build. And it's the reason why someone like Jawad, for example, who's a rock star, by the way, Jawad is one of the smarter people you'll ever want to meet. He's super smart. He's got a heart of gold, and he's awesome. He was a cloud engineer for approximately 12 years. He came to us, and about a year later, he was hired by AWS as a solutions architect. And he's a rock star, and they're lucky to have him. But in the 6 months, Ivan Tamba and his friend Jordan Kitko both got hired to me. Both were college students, no work experience, hired by AWS as a solutions architect in about 6 months. And why was that? Because engineering doesn't teach architecture. Engineering teaches engineering, and it teaches you to think like engineering, and it often has a different set of skills. So you need to be trained in architecture. And if you do that, you'll be able to get any architectural role that you need. And I invite you to join us on the How to Become an Architect webinar tomorrow, and we'll actually talk about it. But I just wanted to show you why, for example. So if we look at the skills that you need to be an architect, for example, a cloud architect, they're going to be a hybrid set of business skills and technical skills, and you're going to need to learn them. You could learn them from us, you can learn them where you want, but you're going to have to learn them. So you're going to have to learn networking. For example, routing protocols like BGP, what your IP addressing plan or your subnetting plan, your routing plan should be, some basic elements of switching and things like that, some wide area network technologies and which ones to use and why, compute, what type of compute you would use and why, what type of storage would use and why, what type of load balancing or layered load balancing architecture would you use and why, how would you design your security and why. Not how to. So that means learning how the stuff works and how it fits together, not how to build it. And most people don't know that. So you're typically going to need some training. But you have to understand, as the architect, we have to sell the architecture to the client, which means you're going to have to learn sales skills. Nobody gives us any information, so we're going to have to ask the client where they're going, how their business operates, where their business pain points are, and even ask questions about their technology long before we can get the design. So that's a big part of their job, learning how to interview the client. Now, in our job, we're going to be giving presentations almost every day, including your last interview. So you're going to have to get some presentation training. Now, if you're with us, we train all of this, but you have to get those skills too. Now, when it comes to architecture, we have to build a team and lead a team of 15 to 50 people. So you have to have those leadership skills. Now, you don't have to work as a leader, but you can get them. Just get leadership training. I mean, we provide it, but if you're not with us, just get it. And you've got to be able to understand business, because what we are doing as architects is designing a business strategy to optimize our clients' performance. So there's a lot that goes into it. So, my best approach would be to get the kind of training that we can have. T. Irving, two things. One is in the description of this video. I've got a completely free book that's written on all those skills, and that'll tell you what you need. But two, join me on the webinar tomorrow. And not only can I answer your questions when I go over the role, but I can actually assess where you're at by asking you some questions and then see what you would need to become an architect. Because Right now, I'm working on what I don't know based upon what I've seen, based upon speaking to engineers that have done that just role you're describing. But maybe you know something different. Maybe you've had a different past experience, and I can assess that. And I'm happy to give you guidance if you want, based upon your something that's more customized to you. And we can do that completely free on the webinar tomorrow. So please join us on the webinar. Now, if you've got other questions or other people have questions, please ask them. I want to help. I really do. So your last project was specifically role-based access control for users. Would I recommend mastering one domain first or becoming broad in your understanding of the cloud? So we have to know where you want to go. So for example, and why do I say this? I've got a cloud architect that needs to know some networking, some security, some IAM, and yes, I kept that out of security for a reason. It's a different role. And some business, some storage, some compute, some applications, application integrations, databases. You're starting to think this is getting pretty big. So if I'm going to be a generic cloud architect, I'm not going to know that much about, I'll know some things. I'll know what role-based access control is. I'll know what context-aware IAM is. I'll definitely know what attribute-based is. And I'll even know what would make sense. But I'm going to bring in some kind of security architect to architect my federated IAM and my all these IAM systems that we're going to be having, because they have more expertise in that. Now, if I wanted to be a security architect, now I'd be focusing a lot more on security architecture things, and that's one domain. So for a security architect, now we're not talking necessarily the same level skills. Now we need people that have got a lot of knowledge on risk management, people that can, for example, identify and classify assets, assess risks, prioritize threats, design controls, develop incident response plans. And then when we get into network security, things like network access controls, packet filters, micro-segmentation. And then we think like data security, like data classification, controlling access, data integrity, data loss prevention, encryption type things. And then we think about application security, which is code checks, input validation, that kind of thing. And then we get involved a little bit as security architects into IAM, but definitely the types of IAM and federated IAM and cloud access security brokers, those types of things, and to a degree physical security and degree cryptography. So see, if I'm a security architect, that's going to be my focus. And now I can't know applications like an application architect. So I think we need to figure out where you want to go. You tell me where you want to go, and I'll give you a roadmap to get there. And here's the way we build our roadmaps. The same way we design our architectures. We look at your goal. So here's your goal. Then we look at all the skills you need to do to be great at that role. That's your destination. Then we look at you, and we assess your starting point. And then we assess your skills. And maybe you already have some of the skills, so you're already closer. And then it's about building a plan to get you the skills that you're missing to get you to the role. That's what we do. So I hope to see you in that webinar tomorrow. We'll talk. I can assess you, and I'll tell you where you need to begin. But you've got so many good options for you. Just where you choose to focus your time and energy and training now. Great question. Please feel free to ask more. And Chris, bring in the next one. And don't be shy. I really don't bite. I just want to help. From Idarius, how do you go about getting deeper into technology that surrounds the cloud? You hear me mention it so many times, but you've never heard of it before. So you can't help get excited. Good. So here's what I mean when it comes to be going deep. So you have to understand how the technology actually works. So Idarius, if you understand that, for example, networking, and all our students basically learn networking. So if you understand the routing protocols that make networking occur and how networking actually works and the way packets move through the network and the protocols that are used and how they work and how the addressing plan determines how your traffic flow and how your routing flow determines the scalability of your system, for example, and you understand that, now you're already there. Then if you actually understand compute and you understand server architecture, and by understanding server architecture means understanding the server, understanding the processor, understanding the DRAM, understanding the types of storage that you actually have, so you know how to pick out the right kind of compute technology. Guess what? Then when we use a virtual machine versus a function as a service versus application virtualization, it doesn't, or a container, it doesn't matter, because you'll know all of it and what kind of technology it needs to ride on. And then when you learn containers and container orchestration and you learn application functionalization in every cloud, everywhere you know it is. So it's not how to click a couple of boxes on a screen. Architects don't do that. It's knowing what those boxes actually change when that engineer or the admin clicks them. What's the impact of adding a route on this router in Japan to the people working in New York City and the other people working in Cape Town, for example? Because there could be a big impact. So architecture is about that. Architecture is learning how the storage area networks work, the strengths of them, their weaknesses of them, how they manage data, how they decouple storage and compute, that kind of thing. It's going into load balancers and understanding how they can actually forward packets, and the architectural choices of round robin versus least latency versus weighted round robin, and what you would do and why you would choose them and what benefits they can bring. That's going deep. It's the exact opposite of what most people do. So best way I can describe it, Idarius, is, I became a CCIE. I'm one of the first that actually took it back when it was this miserable 2-day exam. It's still miserable, but it was really terrible. So in that, here's what I knew by the time I was done the CCIE. I knew OSPF, I knew EIGRP, I knew IGRP, I knew RIP, I knew intermediate systems to intermediate systems, and I knew BGP. For the most part, that was what I knew, and I knew some basic switching things. And that's what it took to pass the CCIE exam. Now, as soon as I passed the CCIE exam, I went, I don't know anything, because I started to get to work on these big, giant network architectures. And all the things they were talking about, for the most part, none of it was on the CCIE exam. The CCIE gave me the fundamentals, and then I spent the next 25 years actually learning networking. So then I actually learned how you could use these protocols, how far you could push them, where their breaking points are, how you would work around the limitations in these protocols, how you would work around the limitations in this part of the wide area network, how you can tune things to fail and heal quicker. And that's architecture. That takes knowledge of how everything works and how the parts are fit together and the trades of using one technology or protocol versus another one. So that's what I mean by getting deep. And that's why all the people that do build these hands-on cloud projects, they basically show me not to hire them. Because as soon as somebody says they've made a WordPress site, that's my cloud project, and I say, okay. So before you made this site, tell me about the decisions. What type of server did you pick and why? For example, what were your processor demands and what were your DRAM demands and disk IO performance demands? Why did you choose Apache versus Nginx? What were the strengths of Nginx versus Apache for you, or versus you made that choice? Now, I see you use this to secure it. Why did you use this versus other options? Do you see the weakness here in what you've done? Explain the weakness to me in what you've done. And all those things don't come out of learning how to build it. They come out of learning how to do it. And I'll show you what I mean, Darius. Let me grab this from my what do you call it? I think I saw one of these. Okay, so here we go. So see this book? It's one of my favorite intro-level books in networking. It's called TCP/IP Illustrated. So this is just about the Internet Protocol. Now, there are actually three volumes of just this. And this is just about the Internet Protocol. So, for example, if we're going to look at Internet Control Message Protocol, do you see how deep that goes into the headers and what's being sent? By the time you're done reading this 3 or 4 times or whatever it takes, you actually understand the Internet Protocol. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, I want to show you this by comparison of deep versus wide. So I know I have it here. Here we go. This, by comparison, is the official Google Professional Cloud Architect Study Guide, the actual book that was published and recommended by Cisco. Now, this is the entire Google Cloud. This is the Internet Protocol. Google Cloud, just the Internet Protocol that we talk about when we go deep. You know what you get when you finish this? If this is all you've done, who's going to pay somebody $250,000 to read one book that's a couple hundred pages? No one. Now, if this is just your intro level to IP, and then you know BGP in a book that's quite this thick, and then you know other routing protocols in a book that's quite this thick, now all of a sudden you're a professional. You're like a doctor, or where you've got a big body of knowledge and you have the ability to make things. So that's the way we train our architects. I want my architects to walk in an interview and then say, who the heck are you? And how did you know this? Because that way no one cares about their level of experience because they're that great. But that's what I mean when I talk about getting deep. Knowing how to do the job and being able to do it well and solve problems. It's such a great question you asked, Darius. You'll be there, Mike. You've been feeling quite stuck lately, and I feel this has really helped you. So T. Irving, I'm thrilled it can help you. Nobody needs to get stuck. And we all get stuck at some point in our life, and sometimes we just need someone to basically say, here's your options. And I can tell you, I've been stuck in my life, and people have helped me, and that's why I do this, because we all get there. But at the end of the day, you can literally do anything. It's all just about the choices you make today moving forward. So can't wait to meet you. And if you want, you can turn on your camera. We can have a face-to-face conversation. I really look forward to speaking with you. Of course, we can bring in the next one. Great question from Andrew Spencer. Can network-attached storage be more beneficial to a business over storing object storage in the cloud? Is it just the file shareability that makes the NAS better as opposed to the cloud benefit? So let's talk about NAS versus cloud. Network-attached storage is file storage, which means that multiple users, Andrew, can use the same storage at the same time. So with my NAS, I can have 50 servers accessing the same file share at the same time. So that's kind of cool. Now, we have a 96 terabyte NAS, and we actually have two of them. So 96 terabytes of object storage in the cloud cost me about $3,000 a month, $3,500 a month. And assuming I can access and retrieve it anytime as I want. So $3,500 a month. Now my 96 terabyte RAID array cost me $5,000. Actually, now you could buy them for $4,000 for what that is, but let's say it's still $5,000. So over the course of 36 months, if I left it in the cloud, I'd have 3,500 times 12 months. So let's put that into, let's actually calculate that. So 3,500 times 12 on the cloud. So that's going to cost $42,000 over the course of 3 years. Now, okay, so I bought two $5,000 NASs and I have them synchronized in my house in New Jersey and my house in Florida, just in case anything happens. And they are a total of $10,000 versus the $42,000. Now, here's the thing. I get much better performance out of my NAS with the 4 10 gig interfaces it has and a link aggregation group, which gives me 40 gigs per second, than I ever could over an internet connection to AWS. And in order to get 4 10 gig connections to AWS with guaranteed performance, we now be talking about another $50,000 a month. All they can, so now we might be dealing with $50,000 a month in networking connections and cloud service as opposed to something that's $10,000 one time. So that's why I don't use object storage for that. Now, here's what object storage is good for. It's immutable, meaning things can't change on it. So when I do backup and archival purposes in a high security environment, we back up to immutable object storage. And that way, for example, if it was infected with malware, nothing can happen because object storage is immutable. Now, we also have to look at it, for example, in that object storage tends to have metadata, which is data about the data, which is typically better metadata than you would ever get out of file storage. So, for example, if I was creating a big data architecture by comparison, Andrew, now I might be wanting to use the metadata in object storage to create a data lake and do other things. So I might be using object storage. So it all depends on what I want to do. Now, if I've got data sovereignty standards and I want to keep it in the same place, it's going to be a lot cheaper to do it with several network attached storage environments than it will be using the cloud provider's object storage. So it all depends what we need. But of course, you've got to manage your own NAS storage. You don't have to manage the cloud provider storage. I guess that takes some time. So, there's these things. So it all comes down to trades. There's no best thing. It's just about what's the right trade for your client. Great question there, Andrew. You've heard me speak quite differently between a solutions architect and sales engineer, but in the UK, you think a lot of job specs are quite blurred. Is a solutions architect required to code or configure the system? No. Now, here's the thing. I've never seen an actual job description in cloud architecture that was correct. I have plenty of solutions architects that I've trained. If you are a solutions architect in the UK or anywhere else, because we see the same goofy things in the UK and everywhere else, you will not be allowed to touch your client's technology. And if you tried to touch your client's technology, you'd probably be fired on the spot. So there is no coding, there is no configuring, there is no Python, there is no DevOps, there is no Linux. Now, T. Irving, I will tell you where these ridiculous job descriptions come from. And it's actually funny because I was talking about this and for years and made videos about it for years. And I had the CEO of a national recruiting firm actually on my YouTube channel one day, Christina Marino, where there's a video on this channel where she talked about why job descriptions are completely meaningless. In fact, it got so bad that CIO Magazine actually published an article in What Does a Cloud Architect Do? And I'll actually tell you what they do because it will make sense. And you can also see another video from David Lithicum. And this is for people in the UK. This is for people in the US. This is people for Australia, Canada. So when CIOs were asked, they said that they would like their cloud architects to lead the cultural change for cloud adoption, developing and coordinating a cloud architecture, and developing a cloud strategy and coordinating the adoption process. Find talent with the necessary skills, assess application software and hardware, create a cloud broker team, establish best practices for cloud across the company, oversee governance and mitigate risk, work closely with IT security people to monitor privacy and develop incident response procedures, manage budgets and estimate cost and operate at scale. Now, I'll tell you, after years of talking about all these job descriptions being workless, Ethan, I think it's Evans, one of the VPs at Amazon, made a LinkedIn post, and he talked about why no job description ever means anything. And it's the same thing I've said. So I'll have Chris have the Amazon pop it in for you when he has a chance into this chat box. And, here's what happens. I am now a hiring manager, and I want to hire a solutions architect. Could be the US, could be the UK. Doesn't matter. And now I call HR and finance. And when I call HR and finance, Chris, post the Chris Evans post or the Ethan Evans post from Amazon on the silly job descriptions. So now what I'm doing is, so now I call HR or finance and say, I need a solutions architect. So now the people in HR and finance that went to school for finance or human resources that know nothing about technology, now all of a sudden are writing a job description for a cloud architect role or a solutions architect role. And by the time you actually get to the hiring manager asks you some architecture questions. And you know what? All the people that make it to the hiring manager can't pass the interview because they all have been on a ridiculous job description. So the next thing I typically do, and we see it in the US and the UK, is I, as a hiring manager, call a recruiter and say, I need an actual architect. And the recruiter says, what do you want? And I say, I need somebody that can design a solution, present a solution, sell a solution, lead a team. Oh, they're like, so you want a real architect? I'm like, yeah. And then 24 hours later, they call me with a list of names of people they know, and I interview them, and I hire one of them, and I bypass my entire HR department. So no architect touches the technology. And I've hired people and trained architects that also work in England. And, in multinational environments, I was always interviewing architects that we were hiring in every part of the world. in every country. And I used to actually orient new students and new architects in England almost every week in Reading. So no, in the UK, real architects are doing real architecture work. I'm aware of all the silly, ridiculous job descriptions. But that's actually why CIO Magazine actually went, or Gartner asked CIOs, what do you want? And I can tell you what goes into each one of these things. And this is why I can tell you, ever since I left engineering 25 years ago, I've not been allowed to actually touch technology. No architect is. So what is leading the cultural change for cloud adoption? Well, that really means going to the client's executives, asking about their vision, asking them who the key stakeholders in their business are, speaking to those key stakeholders are, finding out who the non-official leaders are, those go-to people, and you got to take those go-to people and also get their buy-in and support. So that's going to be leading the cultural change for cloud adoption. Developing and coordinating a cloud architecture is when the client says, we're interested in this, I've got to create an architecture team. And I've got to go meet with the client, learn their business goals, learn their business architecture, learn their key business processes, and then build myself an architecture team of people that are going to help me design that architecture. That's developing and coordinating the cloud architecture. Now, instead of developing the cloud strategy and coordinate the adoption process, here's what we're talking about. Are they single cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud? As it stands now, 98% of enterprises are all multi-cloud. Whereas, say, 89% of all businesses, meaning smaller businesses, are now also multi-cloud. So we have to determine if we're multi-cloud. We have to determine what kind of applications we use, from which vendors we choose to use. And then we have to figure out, how do we do it? Do we do it in one straight bing bang architecture? Do we need transition architectures? What needs to be done first, second, and third? So that's the three main responsibilities of the cloud architect. That's 80% of your time. Now, they also said, what else would you like to do? Find talent with the necessary skills. So that's why, working for American companies, I've had the opportunity to interview architects in England and others to help find talent for the necessary skills on my architectures. Assessing applications, software, and hardware. Yep, you got to build a team of people. They got to assess all the client's technology. Creating that, they call it a cloud broker team. Well, that's building that architecture team I talked about. Now, we do, and it's an architect that was listed by the CIOs and what they wanted. We do establish best practices for the cloud across the company. Absolutely. Things like a standard image should be this. All demilitarized zones going to the internet where web-facing hosting activities will have this type of configuration, this many layers of next-generation firewalls, IDS, what have you, this type of endpoint protection. So yeah, lots of best practices and standards that we're going to come up with across the cloud. And then it said selecting cloud providers and vetting third-party services. Oh yeah. So we'll determine whether we go to AWS, Azure, Cisco, Nutanix, OpenStack, Google, Oracle, or whatever combination. But we'll also have to think about our security vendors like Palo Alto and Fortinet and Checkpoint and Cisco, because we're not going to be using the cloud provider stuff half of the time. And then we're going to need to get in other application vendors, database vendors, potentially unified communications vendors, and all these other environments. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Now, we do a lot of governance and risk mitigation. We come up with change control procedures and architectural documentation, artifacts. Yeah, we do a lot of that, build governance teams. Working closely with the IT security people to monitor privacy and develop incident response procedures. Absolutely. So the security team and the security architects are responsible for the main security design, but we cloud architects have to integrate with them. And we have to determine incident response procedures like, okay, so if we're hacked, who speaks to the press? Who are the people that come in? Who speaks to regulators? Which attorneys need to speak to who? Who speaks to law enforcement if and when it happens? So we do a lot of that. We do help manage budgets and build business cases, and we operate at scale. So that's what they're saying they want. That's the real cloud architect job description. So you won't be coding anything, but yes, you'll see these wacky job descriptions written by HR who have no idea what we're dealing with, and you'll see it forever. I've never had more than 10% of the skills in a job description, and I've never been on an interview where I didn't get hired. So you'll be great. We'll talk more about it tomorrow. But please feel free to ask questions. In a scenario where the customer contact is technical, how do you get the CXO to the table? You arrange it. So first is you're going to have to be what's called CXO relevant, because if you're not what's called CXO relevant, they will never let you speak to the CXO. I'm going to make that very clear. And I can tell you, I've been in rooms where there was someone in there where it was me as an architect, and it was a sales rep, and it was a VP. And we brought in one person because they were a subject matter expert. And as soon as they started babbling about technology as opposed to business things, we've escorted them out of the room because we had no choice. So the key is, do you convey yourself in a business manner? Are you actually looking at the business? Are you looking at the organization's key business processes? And if you're not, you're going to have to. So you need to help them. In order to do this, we need to see what is the key process that the employees do their job. Who can I speak to? Who are the key stakeholders here? You're not going to be able to sell anything real to the customer unless you reach the CIO. Now, the CIO is going to be deeply concerned about the technology doing something for the business, because if not, they get fired. So when you speak to the people, you need to be able to speak with the CIO. Now, they're going to have to be able to perceive you as someone that's CXO relevant, but you're going to have to ask. And if you're there and you're there with an account manager, one of them already has those executive contacts. But if you don't get it, how are you going to design an architecture? And that's kind of the thing that, how could you potentially help a client design something that's going to make it better if you have no idea what the client wants or needs? Now, how bad is it when people go to tech teams and they don't go to the leadership teams? 70 to 80% of the time, meaning 7 or 8 out of 10 times, the architecture provides no value. So go in there and ask for it. How do I speak to the VP of architecture? How do I speak to the CIO? And you might just have to go a level up and then ask to go to the next level and go to the next level. And I've had to do that where I knew the manager. And then I was like, let's get your manager involved. I think it'll be good for you. Let's move up to the director. And I've had to do that along the way too. So you do have to ask for it, and it all is going to be dependent upon your political capital and your relationships with them. But definitely do talk about it. And maybe take your client to lunch or dinner or drinks. Maybe get them comfortable and let them talk about and introduce the topic of why you need it. Get some commitment and go have another conversation. But you have to get to the top. If you can't get high enough up, you can't really do anything. And the reality is they're probably not going to buy your stuff anyway. Why would you buy a solution from somebody if you don't even know who they are and don't trust them? So I would definitely recommend getting higher. Or so who is the account manager that you're working with? Don't they have the ability to get you higher? Because you shouldn't be, as a rule, we architects typically help the sales rep, but there's typically a sales executive tied to us somewhere along the line. Maybe if you let me know more, I'll be able to be further of help. Is it ideal to ask the customer for an architecture review in a discovery call? I don't know what you mean by an architecture review. So if you're talking about being able to bring in the people of 15 to 50 people, evaluate their architecture documentations, and architecture your technology thing, no, because you don't even know what you don't know in a discovery call. The whole point of the discovery call is to find out the client's business goals, what they're trying to do, who are the key people that you need to see. Because without it, you don't even know what they're trying to achieve. So then you need to find out those key leaders that you need to speak to. Then you need to speak to those key leaders. And then when you speak to those key leaders, you ask those key leaders, who are the other people you need to speak to along the way? And then when you get to those leaders, then you say, well, who are the non-managers, but are the ones that everybody goes to, the ones with the biggest influence, because you're going to need them too. Because you're going to have to understand the various components of the business, what each their business challenges, how the parts of the business work together if you're going to be able to do something meaningful. Otherwise, you're just swapping technology. And all that really is here. Let's take your shirt from the closet on this side of the room to move it to the closet on this side of the room. We didn't make any changes. But when we know what the organization wants to do, and we start there. And then after we know what the organization wants to do, then we ask, how do they do their jobs? And where are the pain points in the way people do their job? And then we figure out, how do they really want to work in the future? And then we work backwards from that to create the design. That's when our architecture works. That's when we're doing architecture. And why is this? Let's say we're trying to create an architecture for a company's sales rep to make them sell better. Well, we need to know the way the sales rep works. How does an appointment get scheduled, for an example? How do they go to the client? What did they do on the initial client call versus the second client call versus the third client call? Where are the information gaps along the way? Is the sales process taking too long because the account team doesn't know what to sell or doesn't have the knowledge on hand how to do it? Or is it that they can't find the people and research, what have you? So when we understand what the organization's challenges are, and if we say, for example, that business, the problem is those people, when they're on site, they just don't have the knowledge and they have to constantly go back again and again to the environment. Now, what if we could use some kind of unified communication system with an expert system? For example, when that sales rep was there and the client asked a question on IP video, and the solutions architect and the sales rep weren't an expert, they pushed the button on their tablet and it brought in an expert who was a distinguished architect or a distinguished engineer from, say, Cisco, that could talk to you about the voice thing while you're right in the room. Or maybe it's not even distinguished, the senior one, if it's a smaller business. And they can help shorten that sales cycle from 10 visits to the client to 2 or 3. Well, that means the salespeople can sell more and more and more to more clients, and that helps. So that's why we need to know what it is ahead of time, because we need to know what problems we're trying to solve. And they're all business problems. They're never technology problems. They're business problems. Sometimes they're technology problems. But if we're only focusing on the tech, we're not doing our clients any favor. So we first need to understand their business long before we can think about the tech. Good question, though. Is having an industry focus within cloud architecture a good thing to do? It can be. And you've heard me mention technology companies, but what other industries are in need of an architect? So before I answer this, if anybody's got any questions, please feel free to bring them in. We want to do anything we can to help you. But let's talk about this. So any company who needs to get a competitive advantage needs an architect. So you'll see global retailers that will have architects. You'll see global banks that will have architects. You will see global healthcare organizations that need architects. Any business that really has a heavy impact of technology, typically speaking, you will need an architect. So 5-person business definitely doesn't need somebody to be an architect to design strategic solutions for them. But big business that has a lot invested in technology needs to mean that they get some value out of the technology, not just build the technology. They need to know they're getting something out of it. So for the most part, any organization in today's world that's substantially sized will need an architect. Now, not all organizations have the same need for architects. And let's talk about what I mean by that. You could be dealing with a bank that might have 300 architects easily. By the time you look at their security, actually, for example, JP Morgan Chase has 2,000 AI people, just AI, and that was before the rest of the world starting. But they had like 2,200 AI, just AI, because those AI people can give that bank better advantages to analyze data, to trade algorithmically, and do all kinds of things, be able to determine and calculate rates and all kinds of things. So, do I buy? Do I invest? Do I hold? Do I sell? Do we? All kinds of crazy things that could be calculated with AI in the bank. So they'll have thousands of art people and potentially 1,000 architects on staff. So it all depends on how much transformation that organization is actually trying to do. So it's really all we're talking about. So keep that in the actual back of your mind. So anybody that uses technology for a competitive advantage needs just one. Small business typically doesn't need one. But let's talk about the actual architects that we really deal with. I mean, all businesses need a business architect. And ultimately, they're the people that structure the way the business works, the business processes, how the business operates. So your CEO, your CFO, your CIO, your COO, they're all business architects. And when you deal with management and strategy consultants, they're also business architects. So kind of keep this in the back of your mind. Enterprise architects is people, processes, and technologies. That sounds a whole lot like management consulting with the added benefit of a little cloud architecture kind of speaking, which for the most part are enterprise tech architecture. It is. And then we've got our cloud architecture. So yeah, lots of opportunities for you to work. Can a cloud architect fit into the role of an Azure solutions architect? Easy. So it's easy for a cloud architect to do a solutions architect job. And here's the reason why. If you're a cloud architect, and then I'll answer the other side of it. If you're a cloud architect, you automatically know the network, the data center, and all clouds. So you understand the virtual machines, the containers, the storage area networks, the load balancers, the infrastructure. And by doing so, it doesn't matter which cloud you're in. So now I need a virtual machine. So I'm in AWS, I call it EC2. I'm in Azure, I call it an Azure virtual machine. I'm in Google, I call it a compute engine instance. It's nothing for the cloud architect to take a solutions architect job, because the cloud architect, by very definition, needs to have knowledge of all clouds and all cloud technology. Now, by comparison, if a solutions architect is a real good solutions architect and they understand all the underlying technology, and they're not going to just go and look at some Azure virtual machine number and calculate that, but they know how to look at the processor, how to look at the DRAM and understand what those things are. And they can understand the impact of one thing on the network and it's another part of the network. Great. And if they can understand the impact of a single change on one part of the system on the other part of the system, that's really all we're talking about. So the cloud architect can easily do it, but if the solutions architect, if they only know one vendor and they don't actually know the technology, they'll have a hard time becoming a cloud architect. So if they don't know what block storage is, and they don't understand block storage's strengths and weaknesses and limitations and where it fits into the ecosystem, but all they know is, managed disks, well, that person's going to need to be completely trained for storage. But if that person really does understand block storage, object storage, file storage, how they work, how to use them, their strengths, weaknesses, how to work around their weaknesses, well, they can do it in any cloud or any data center in the world. So it's fairly similar. So if we look at here, there's really two places where solutions architects actually fit in. And I'll kind of show you where they actually fit in the solutions architect world versus the cloud architect world. Bear with me a second. I know I created a visual for that recently with Alonzo's help, because he makes prettier pictures than me. If not, I'll okay, here we go. I think this will be a help. Okay, bear with me a second. So if we look at this, and this will kind of help you understand where the solutions architects fit into the puzzle. At the top, and typically speaking, the top pay, we're typically getting the chief information officer, and they're really an architect. They're focused on the strategy of the organization, but they also have to run it. So they have to hybridize their role between operating the IT systems and all the people that run it and architecture. So which is why they typically have an enterprise architect that reports to the CIO. Now, you could also hear your enterprise architect called the chief technology officer, sometimes the chief architect, sometimes the VP or SVP of architecture. They could all be doing the same enterprise architect executive role. Now, here we're focusing on people, the organizational processes, the organization's value streams, every kind of businessy MBA thing you can possibly think of with a little bit of tech. And then we get to this cloud architect level. Now, the cloud architect's a big role because we're dealing with our everything, and we're going to have two sets of people that are going to help work with us. So I'm now a cloud architect, and now I'm going to be in AWS and Azure. I'm going to have an AWS solutions architect from AWS come and give me some architectural guidance on AWS. I'm going to have an Azure solutions architect also give me some guidance and recommendations on what they can sell me with Azure. And so as a cloud architect, I'm going to have to manage some of these solutions architects who are going to know a little bit more about a particular vendor's product than the cloud architect. But the cloud architect is going to have a broader skill set, more executive skills, more business skills, more leadership skills. Now, the cloud architect and the solutions architect will also have to lead specialty architects like network architects, security architects, application architects, IAM architects, artificial intelligence architects, and others. Now, there will also be other solutions architects that are going to come in, because all a solutions architect does is design, present, and sells, generally speaking, for a vendor. So, for example, my network architect would be calling, say, Juniper Networks and Cisco Networks and Arista, and they'll all be sending solutions architects to help the network architect design the networking thing that's going to go on the cloud. So how do you go from here, the solutions architect, to here? Because it's getting much closer to the CIO. Now, this means a lot more business executive knowledge, because now you're going to be dealing with multi-cloud architectures, which are bigger architectures. Now you're going to be dealing with bigger dollars, so you're going to have the business skills to build the business case that will buy your multi-cloud thing. Now you're going to have to lead a team of a whole heck of a lot of people, because your focus just got expanded and you can't know all these things that well. So now you've got more leadership skills. Now, you're also going to need a whole heck of a lot of emotional intelligence to work with all these people. You're going to have to ethically influence these folks into doing their jobs, because you can't fire them, but they still have to work for you. So you've got to be able to get people to work for you without the authority to hire and fire, which gets very complicated. So to go from here to here, you learn more business. To go from here to here, you just spend a weekend memorizing the names that the cloud provider called their stuff, and then you're easily fine to do and you're good to go. So I kind of hope that helps. If you've got a question, please feel free to ask it, and then Chris will go back and bring in the next one. You're not sure if this question is misplaced, but in your organization, is there an opportunity to dive into the machine learning integration space? It feels inherently further from the business and the client. How do you balance it? So how do you balance innovation and staying close to the stakeholders? So I think there's two different things. I'm going to start with innovation from stakeholders. If you don't get the guidance from the stakeholders, there's zero innovation. I'm going to make it very clear. The only way the business can innovate is if you go into the business, understand the stakeholders' needs, understanding what they need to operate that business better, and create a strategy that's going to help them. So I'm going to make it very clear. If you're not working with the stakeholders, you're doing zero innovation, nothing. Nada, zilch, nothing. And that's because how are you going to help a business innovate if you don't know what they need? And the only people that know what they need are the people that are managing and running levels of this business. So you have to speak to the stakeholders. So let's separate that question out. Now, if you're working at your company and they are offering you the opportunity to dive deeper into a more technical place than you're already at, but that's what they want you to do, should you do it? Because I think that's the other question. Well, we have to understand that you're there for a reason. They have work for you to do. And then you need to ask yourself the following things. If you don't do what they want you to do, how's that going to fare in your career, long-term and short-term? So you may have to want to do what they need you to do. Or are you in the kind of company where you can say, if you need me to do this, I am more than happy to do it. But the direction I'd like to take my career is here. Is there an opportunity for you to put me on a project that's more architecture related or more business related? Because that's my goals. But if you still need me, I'll do anything I can to help you because I care about you and this company. And even in those cases, you might be able to negotiate something with your manager where I'll get you through this crisis because I know you need me. But after this, I'm going to move into this leadership position. Will you let me go to training? Will you help me make this transition? Will you be my coach, for example, along the way? And I bet you get buy-in for that too. And I'll tell you, along the way, I've actually had to take projects that were not necessarily aligned with my career goals, but they were an area where I had an extreme area of expertise. And I went in there because of my extreme expertise, wowed them, and then used that as a springboard to go back and do the things that I wanted to do that I asked them about ahead of time. And that's okay too. So, know the company that you work for, know what they really need, know how you can provide value, and know how you can negotiate a plan to get to the goal where you really want. And that's totally fine. And I think I remember, yeah, and I can, yeah, that's totally fine. I think I probably should leave it there, but that's totally the way you could do it. Okay, so if there are any last questions, let me know. Otherwise, Chris and I are going to get back to things because I know the two of us have been losing crazy, chaotic days for the last couple of days. But if you've got some last minute questions, we're happy to do them. I just want to make sure that we see so many of you tomorrow on the webinar. It's free. We'll talk about the cloud architect role, but if you want, I'll talk about AI architects, security architects, enterprise architects. I've been almost every architect role you can be except for an AI architect. And that's why I don't teach AI architecture. I have David Lithicum, who's kind of the king and queen, or well, the king of all kinds of architectures and everywhere in between. He's one of those top architects you'll ever meet in your life, but he's got lots of AI experience. But I'm happy to talk about any of the architecture careers, how you actually move into these careers, how you get promoted, answer any questions you have, assess you, all on this free webinar. So join us tomorrow. The link is in the description of this video. We don't do it very often, but we're super excited about our 4-year anniversary. I spent about 15 years doing private coaching, but 4 years ago we started here and we created this company, and now we've got employees everywhere. So I kind of hope that I'm excited by it. So we have a 60% off. And also make sure you check out the description of this video for lots of free resources to assist you in your career. And I think we've got one last question that popped in, and I'm happy to answer it. So what are just wanted to know a few things which cloud architects should be good at. Well, you have to be able to sell because you're dealing with potentially billions of dollars of solutions. You have to be able to give a presentation because you'll be giving presentations almost every day. You have to be able to lead a team. And whether you're leading the team to drive and develop an architecture or drive an RFP response, you're going to have to lead a team. You're going to have to build business cases periodically and RFI, RFP, RFQ responses. So that's going to take a level of executive documentation and a whole lot of business knowledge. So you have to be good at business. Now, the good news is we don't touch the technology, so you don't have to code, you don't have to configure, you don't have to know Linux or Python or Terraform, but you need to know how the technology actually works and how the technology fits together. And that's going to be across network, data center, cloud technologies, and everywhere in between. So join us tomorrow on the free webinar. And on this free webinar, we'll go over the entire role. We'll list every skill you need. And it'll get you there. And there's also a free guide in the description of this video that lists every skill you need that you need to be good at. Because you can't just be good at 1 or 2 skills and get hired as an architect. It's going to be a list of skills you need. And that list of skills is actually inside of that document. So go get it. I think it'll be a huge help to you. Okay, well, everyone, it was so nice to see you all today. If you had a good time, maybe give the video a like. It'll signal the algorithm to help other people to see it, and I could appreciate that. I really want to spread our content. If you had a good time, maybe subscribe, hit the bell, and be notified of other things we can help you with your cloud architecture career, your security architecture career, your AI architecture career, or your enterprise architecture career. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you on another webinar or video soon.